Hi everybody, thanks for joining us for Northern Ag TV. Well, cattle prices this year went to levels most of us never thought we'd see. Of course, a big part of that was tight supplies, but Cortney Cowley, Assistant Vice President for the Federal Reserve Bank in Kansas City, told me that demand for beef also is playing a key role in the prices we're seeing for cattle.
Demand for beef across, kind of all segments, whether it be domestic, international, demand has just continued to increase. Even with higher prices, we still see higher demand. There's, a lot of reasons for that. The U.S. produces really high quality beef, and when beef is high quality, it tastes really good. And so as consumers are making decisions on, proteins and what they want to feed their family, beef has still been a really strong segment of that.
With today's prices, it seems like the industry should be poised to grow, but Cortney says there are a number of limiting factors to herd expansion, not least of which is the increasing average age of the producer.
The cattle producers that we have, the majority of them were around in the 1980s. They were around in the 2016 to 2019 time period when prices were really depressed. And so I think to a certain extent that creates some scars or at least memories. And so when you have to make a decision, whether to sell a heifer or retainer when input costs are still higher than they have been, and the cost of rebuilding or financing or buying additional heifers or cattle is really high, it makes a lot more sense to be a seller right now than a buyer. And so yes, I think that has kind of extended out some of those decisions that in aggregate contribute to herd rebuilding, whereas in the past, typically if you see higher profit margins, you see a rebuilding cycle start.
We'll get Cortney's thoughts on what the future may hold for the cattle industry after a word from our sponsor.
From the beginning, we've worked closely with farmers. BNSF's ties to the agricultural community go back 175 years. Together, we've innovated to make the U.S. agriculture supply chain one of the most efficient and productive in the world. Our strong relationship powers BNSF still today and helps us move the nation like no one else can. At BNSF, we move the nation for you.
Well, lower feed costs have helped feed yards to pay record amounts for calves this year. But as we think of the future and likely tighter available calf supplies next year, only getting tighter when heifer retention begins, will that start to squeeze margins for feed yards? I asked Cortney Cowley, how are feed yards positioned in the current market?
When I think of, higher cattle prices, my first thought is probably, well, that's really good for cow-calf producers, but it seems like more of a risk for feedlots, because if you want to buy low and sell high, but if you're buying high, you're hoping to sell higher. With how sensitive markets are, there certainly can be a lot of risk. With just in the past couple of weeks, we saw that where producers were selling cattle and taking a $200 to $300 cut per head. And for a feedlot, that can be a really big difference. And so I think that there are some risks there. That business is not for the faint of heart.
Well, there's a clear price signal to expand the herd, but with all the headwinds, is herd expansion something that we're going to see in the near future?
Heifers on feed, heifers being slaughtered, heifer replacements, all of those are slowly starting to move back to more expansionary type developments. But I think that it's just going to take a long time. My good friend at Oklahoma State, Darrell Peel, I think he said that it's going to be the end of the decade maybe until we really see substantial herd rebuilding be able to occur. And I think I would agree with that. I think the dynamics, the costs involved, whether the incentives or disincentives for producers, I think that all of those have kind of push this cycle out into the longer term.
One thing's for sure, uncertainty and volatility remain very high in today's market. Thanks for joining us for today's report. Have a great day.